Okay, probably the easiest thing I'd like us to start with is, can you please give me a thumbs up? So the thumbs up emoticon if you watched the great video produced by Suzanne last week regarding the assessment 2. So that is fantastic. And it shows you that you're way more prepared than I was today. I didn't have my dollar with me for parking, but you people have already come prepared, and you know a bit about what's happening in this assignment, and you know probably some of the areas of concerns for yourself as well, and hopefully you've come prepared with some questions too. Can you please give me a smiley face emoticon if you've got some questions that you need to ask tonight? Great, thank you, Caitlin. Excellent, Annette. Great, Lois. Having questions pre-prepared and having them that ready to go means that we can really tailor this collaborative session to yourself. So rather than it being just a talk session where I'm just telling you stuff that you already know, at least this way we can answer the questions that you have. Okay. So we're looking at our folio format. There are 4 scenarios, and for each scenario include these headings. So for example, scenario 1 is from week 3. So you start with the scenario, then what the topic is, e.g. relationship with self, and then the resource. So you don't have to include an image, it's not compulsory. And remember, the image doesn't actually relate, it's not marked. It's more just there to be able to help guide your work. You need to have a short description and the source for that resource. Then the next step is the rationale and the references, please. Okay, Caitlin, yep, CJ, sure. Definitions. Well, let's see if we can do this collaboratively. What is a resource? What do you believe a resource is in the context of our assignment? Okay, excellent. This is what I needed to clarify. Okay, CJ, that's I like the response, CJ. Something that can be added or applied to a situation to enhance or resolve it. Rebecca, great. Something that can be used to aid in reaching a set goal. Annette, you've mentioned about an app, a tool, an activity that you can use and apply. Great. So if we go back to Ali, this is what I needed to clarify. When we're looking at a resource, it is anything that you can apply to the situation or the context of the scenario to be able to improve the behavior. So what is a resource that you can utilize, you as the teacher or the student or a combination of the both? What is something that can be applied to that scenario that would have a positive impact, make a positive change to that behavior? Okay, are we all clear about that, about resource? What is a resource? If that's the case, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, I love Tarania, so it could be a teaching method or communication strategy. Yes. Okay, Suze.
Hey everybody, I was just thinking it might be helpful to actually run by some examples of what a resource might be. So for example, an educational website could be an example of a resource, a mindfulness app for an iPad, an observational chart. So there's just a few examples to start with. So I'm just wondering if everyone can keep adding to the chat box some examples of what a resource might be.
That's school policy. Okay, good. Bullying quiz, I found that on the Education Victoria website. Yep, great. Okay, Jennifer, can you elaborate a bit more on the program that you mentioned? An activity that's been successful in the classroom setting. Okay, good. So when you're looking at this resource, you need to be able to explain it. So you can't assume that the person knows what it is. So you do need to be able to elaborate on it to be able to describe that resource. Now, I worry sometimes when I see you say policy or a program or something like that that's quite broad. You really need to get quite specific about it. You need to come right down and let that person know. So if it is a website or if it is a particular program, where is that program from? What does it do? So if it's like a resilience program, is it the bounce back program? Is it a PBIS, so positive behavior support program? What is it that your resource is? What are some of the resources? So go, Suze.
Thanks, Alistair. I'd also just like to add one more thing, just a bit of a recommendation. If you can possibly try and go for more resources that will allow you to discuss the resource and the behaviour more in depth. So try and stay away from very simplistic types of resources. Like, for example, if you went onto Google and you searched for teacher resource, a whole lot of lesson templates or worksheets probably come up. You'll get things like a list of rules, a sticker chart. Just stay away from those really simple ones, mainly because it's going to be a little bit more difficult to create depth in your rationale. And you also need to be able to link your resource successfully with sociocultural theories. And that's going to be a little bit harder to do with something like a sticker chart, for example. And also keeping in mind that you want your resource to approach behaviour as a preventative approach rather than a reactive approach as such, if that makes sense.
That's good. So bearing that all in mind, we need to look at that resource, and it's got to be an appropriate resource. The next bit is we've got to then apply it to a rationale. So when looking at our rationale, each item in the folio needs to have a descriptive rationale that discusses how it can be related to supporting and understanding the behaviour described in the scenario. So rationale is your justification. So you've got your resource where you're explaining what it is, but then you have to have that rationale behind it that justifies the use of it. We've got 18 people here tonight. Of those 5 moderators, so we've got 13 participants. So of those 13 participants, have any of you already decided on a resource? And started to think about a rationale. Would anyone be game enough to be able to have a go and share a little bit about ones they've chosen? And they could choose a scenario. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Excellent to have that first response. So I'm thinking of using a buddy reading program for scenario 1. Why is it? You've read my mind, Rebecca, to address self-esteem issues in the reading at the same time. It's great. I remember scenario 1, it even explicitly stated that it's not necessarily the reading skills, it's more that self-esteem. So that is a fantastic one. Has anyone else got anything, or maybe an alternative resource for scenario 1? Okay, we've got some great ideas coming through. So Gerald, I'm thinking of using ways to use audiobooks or apps to encourage students to record their reading. So self-esteem again, so being able to share it and play it back. Found an app for scenario number 2 about talking about your feelings called Digital Problem Solver. Fantastic. Now, CJ, you'll need to have a look at that, and thank you, Sue, for answering that. Scenario 1, in the weekly activities, it was at Robert and Tanya, but in the actual assignment, we're looking at Gerard, and Gerard is a 7-year-old boy who's having difficulty with his reading. So we're going with that one. That's the one that's on the actual assignment topic sheet, so we need to work on that. That's all right, CJ, all good. Suze.
Hey, CJ, I was just going to explain. It's probably understandable that you got confused. You're right about Tanya and Robert. They are scenario 1 in the weekly activities. However, in the assessment sheet, we use Gerard instead. And the reason for this is simply because one of the, further on in the unit, we start to discuss Gerard, and we want to do that after the assessment's been well and truly finished with. So that's all it's about. So yeah, you do need to refer to the assessment sheet for the right scenario. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So, okay, in short, CJ, you're losing audio. So Gerard is the one that we're focusing on because we want to be able to utilize the Gerard discussion after we've done the assignment as well. So it's slightly different to the one that we had for week 3. Okay, we'll try and whip through these ones a bit faster. So what is a framework? Can anyone give me a definition, or the definition that they perceive to be right for a framework? Okay, layered structure. Thank you, Ali. Structured series of steps to follow. Good. So thanks, CJ. So even if we looked at a basic definition, it's something that underlies a system concept or a text. So it's the background. It's what holds it all together. So different frameworks can be used for different resources and that. So a bullying framework or things that work in the background. That then leads to policy. Now, this is something that I know that Suze will touch on when we look at the actual the rubric. But what is a policy? We're looking at school policies and educational policies. So anything that the schools use as a guideline or a basis to be able to make decisions and operate in a day-to-day nature. So there's so many different policies in every school. And for instance, like in our Sandhurst diocese, we break them up into leadership, we break them up into stewardship of resources, we break them up into so many different things, and there's so many policies. But as a educator, you need to be across most of them too. Sue's put up an example of the AQF as a framework, so the Australian Qualifications Foundation or Federation. The framework and the policies is probably better to explain when we're looking at the rubric as well. Do you agree, Suze?
Sorry, Alistair, I missed the question. What was the question?
It's probably better to discuss policies and frameworks, really, when we look at the content of the rubric.
Definitely. I think frameworks, even the Australian curriculum could be considered a framework, I suppose. So I think it is better to go more within the school community for some kind of a structure. So policy would be better.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, we might move on from this page. So we're looking at scenario 1 from week, and it's got at the top from week 3, but what we found is we had to make some changes to this unit for teaching period 3 because it was a bit weird because we're talking about Gerard in the week week 8 or something like that, just after we'd actually submitted the assignment or just before we'd submitted the assignment. So it wasn't it wasn't the best timing. So, for instance, topic, relationship with self. Gerard is a 7-year-old boy who is having difficulty with his reading. When his teacher asks him to read aloud during literacy, he starts to feel really upset about it and now tries to get out of... Oh, I've missed a line. Starts to read but at a slower pace and stumbles over words. He has started to feel really upset about it and now tries to get out of reading time by asking the teacher if he could do errands or go to the toilet. His reading is not progressing, as he is also leaving his readers in the book box, not taking any readers home. So, first step, identifying behaviours. Can we come up with, let's see if we can have 5 different behaviours in our chat box there for Gerard, please. I'll count them up. We can identify one at a time. Feeling upset. Avoidance, yes. Feeling ashamed. Embarrassed. Okay, looking at that as well. Reluctant, lack of confidence, great. Not working on his reading, not taking him home. And what I love about this is the fact that we're not going straight for that slower pace and stumbles over words as a behaviour, because we know that we're looking more at that relationship with self rather than looking at the problem being that his reading is not progressing. We're still looking for that background, that relationship with self that's going to have a bigger impact in the longer run than just trying to address a reading concern at this moment. Okay, thank you. Excellent behaviours identified there. What about a link to theory? What are some theories that we could link to that relate to Gerard? Ecological, can you expand on that, Dagna? Not taking books home, parents not aware. Great. Lois, you mentioned socio-cultural. Whereabouts are we heading with this? Celia, good comments. We go back and look at theories discussed in the unit. Look at theories that you used in assignment 1 too. The meso system, home and school relationship. Good. So we're linking that behavior that we identify from the scenario to a theory. The next step, though, is what are some possible resources that address that behavior but also fit within that theory? What are some resources? Okay, so if we look at, say Dagner's theory, looking at the ecological theory, not taking books home, parents not aware. What are some things then that we could use as a resource that would address that relationship with self then? Okay, diary between home and teacher. Now, reward system. Now, Cedar, what we're looking at when we're looking at, say, reward systems, we're trying to steer a bit clear of rewards and, say, sticker charts, because, again, it's an extrinsic reward, and it reinforces that behavior at that point of need, but it's probably not going to correct the behavior over a longer period of time. Okay, so these are some good conversations that regard the parents. And what we're having a look at then is that we're assuming that the parents are on board with that too. So as long as your theory relates to that too, that works really well. But as you can see, depending on the theory that you use, can dramatically change your perception of the actual scenario. So just keep that in mind too, because there's no one straight answer for this, because depending on your theory and depending on how you link and rationalize the resources, it will definitely depend on that theory. Now that's a very good question, Tarania. Is it okay to make these kinds of assumptions, e.g. parents are on board, given that we don't have much background information? Now that's a habit. The only thing that we know is the actual behaviors that we can see in the scenario. So when we're choosing those resources, we really need to choose a resource that can really work with the behavior that's actually identified from the scenario. And it is all good to make some level of assumption, or as Sue's put, you can discuss possibilities, but yeah, you wouldn't be making a whole big thing where and making up elements of the scenario and taking it further. Say, oh, this parent's contacted the teacher and he's having trouble sleeping at home too because of this. He's worried about it. Like that's taking it further than it needs to. And remember, we're looking at 500 words for each scenario. Suze.
Can you hear me? Oh, all good. So just wanted to say, just be a little bit wary of choosing literacy resources for this scenario. Just keeping in mind that your hint for each scenario is the topic, and the topic is relationship with self. So you should be focusing on the behavior and the resource supporting that behavior. So someone mentioned reading recovery sessions. You can make a link between, there could be some links, I suppose, between building the child's self-esteem and actually improving their reading, and how those two impact on each other. So if you can make a case for, you know, I've got this really great literacy resource and I believe that the student will respond to this in turn will increase his self-esteem. You know, there is loosely a link there that you can make, but to be very safe in terms of covering off the criteria, you are far better off to find a resource that specifically will support the root cause, or the, you know, the root influences on the behaviour, which in this case is relationship to self. Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks, Sue. So that's a very good point, and it was something that it still needs to be made quite a bit. Is we are looking for something that addresses the topic, not just the literacy concerns. Okay, moving on to the next scenario. Ali, fantastic question. Is it okay to use different behaviour theories for each scenario? Yes, it is. You basically look at the scenarios that match that, look at the theories that match that scenario, because you can make a stronger case for particular resources. So we'll go through this one a bit faster. You know the drills with this. So as I'm reading this, I want you to be able to identify the behaviours and list them in the chat box as I'm reading. And then once I finish reading, we'll go straight into linking to theory. We've got a number of ELAs here who'll be able to give feedback on the behaviours that you do identify. So Janine is an 8-year-old girl at a public school in regional Australia. Her auntie and uncle have recently separated and she is very close to them and her cousins. Janine's father has stepped in to assist with supporting the cousins. Janine is feeling left out, alone, and replaced by her father's actions. As a result, Janine has started to create controlling rules for herself and others at school by bossing friends around and taking charge in all class tasks. Her friends are starting to call her bossy boots, and she is yelling back, causing friction and upset to the classroom harmony. Her teacher has noticed her controlling behaviour and has spoken to her at length about the importance of letting others be themselves. Janine is upset about this and has started to tell her mum she doesn't like her teacher or want to go to school. Okay, so fantastic. And looking at just that chat box as I was reading, I can see you identifying the behaviours. That is great. Theory. What would a good theory be that would explain the relationships of others from Janine's scenario? Maybe we'll look at what theory and a possible resource that you could use. Go for it, Suze.
Sorry to be continually butting in here, but just because, you know, I've done this unit before and I've seen some common mistakes come up. In terms of identifying the behaviours, I was really glad that nobody labelled the behaviour as bullying, because what we did have a little bit of an issue with last TP was students labelling Janine as a bully. You just have to be very careful about the use of that term and have a full understanding of what that means. So just quickly off the top of my head, bullying is usually ongoing, it's repeated, you know, it singles out one person, and that's not necessarily the case with Janine. So just be wary of that one. Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca, you had a good point there, the ecological theory, perhaps Maslow's theory. But now, the next step, this fantastic theory, and it's something that would work really well here, but what are some resources that could then be utilised? And this is where you need to be able to go back and do the research to be able to find that out. What we can also do is this. We have different discussion in the discussion board where there is a discussion board topic made up with elements of resources, so we can continue that discussion there too. Okay, that hierarchy of needs fits well. Good. Okay, I'm just being mindful of the time, so I might skip now to the third scenario really quickly. Scenario 3 from week 5, we're looking at relationship with the curriculum. So again, the same as we did before, as I'm reading, if you can put down the behaviors that you identified from the scenario. So Kurt is a 10-year-old boy in an isolated community in Northern Australia. Kurt comes from an Indigenous background, and he and his sisters go to the local school. The resources are low for teachers in the area, and access to further education facilities is limited. Kurt is beyond his years and considered to be gifted. Kurt is not completing any tasks in class, and as a result is distracting his peers. His teacher has realized that he is bored in class, so he has said if he completes the classroom tasks that the rest of the students are doing, he can do some extra special work. This strategy doesn't work for Kurt, and he continues to disrupt the class. So what are some behaviors? Fantastic. Bored, distracting, lacking motivation. CJ not being challenged. Excellent. What is a theory that could back this up? What theory would support that idea of challenging students or not feeling challenged? Okay, so I'll repeat that again. So looking at Kurt's scenario, what would a good theory be that we could utilize to explain that scenario? Okay, Annette, haven't started thinking about this one yet. Okay, that's good. At least we're being honest, and at least it means that we know where we can go and where we can start looking at that too. So this is this week's work as well. So it's something that we do need to get on top of, and we do need to start to look at. But the theories don't change. So the theories that we learned from week 1, we're still applying within this assignment too. So I'll leave that one at the moment because I need to pass on to Suze very quickly just so we can go through the rubrics. Tyrannia, so ecological, lack of support and ecosystem, hierarchy of needs. Again, hey Annette, that point that you made about ecology again, yet some of these scenarios you could probably use the same theory. Some you might choose to use different ones. The key step though is then what resources are actually going to impact on that theory. What is something that's going to be able to show a change in that behavior? So again, and if we look at the example that Susan's put down the bottom of this page here, we always look at scenarios that the student can utilize, so programs and stuff that's introduced from the teacher, but it could be that the teacher needs that professional development. Is it something that, if we look at that behavior, can we fix or can we scaffold learning for the teacher so that he's got the he's got the capacity to be able to teach in a more engaging way? Okay, so moving on, next slide. Suzanne, might leave you there.
All right, thank you, Alistair, fantastic. So just going into the rubric, I did actually go through the rubric quite a bit in the video, but I thought I would just open it up to any questions you have, particularly here at the past level. So any questions that are burning straight away that I need to answer? Okay. One of the things I would like to highlight in this at this level of the rubric in particular, at the past level, is this second dot point that says each item discusses principles, policy and practice in relation to the scenario and behavioural analysis. Now, the wording of that is a little bit tricky. Although it says principles, policy and practice, you've only got 500 words per scenario. So as long as throughout your whole assessment piece you are covering, you have addressed principles, policy and practice, then you will absolutely meet the pass level. We don't expect to see a principle, a policy and a practice for every single scenario because you just don't have the word count to do that. As long as you've covered one of those elements in each scenario, you will be fine. Is that all okay? And any other questions about the pass level?
One trick that a lot of students used in the previous teaching period was they kept referring back to the Australian curriculum, as being that's quite a good framework to use, or a great like policy practice in the background. So they referred back to that as well as a way of showing that. Sorry, my son's awake.
Yes, Elisa, you should have at least a principle or a policy or a practice in every scenario. And that shouldn't really be very difficult, because if you're using a resource, then obviously there's going to be some teacher practice that goes along with that resource at a very bare minimum, or a principle of teaching, an idea around teaching. Or if you're drawing on a school policy, that's fine too. But yes, it would be good if you could have at least one of those in each scenario. And if across the board, across all the 4 assessments, if you at least address a principle and a policy and a practice, I think you're going to be in a very good position. Yes, Rebecca, yeah, principle could definitely be to do with pedagogy, absolutely. So Kay, normally with images, you normally do a little reference underneath the image, and it should also go in the reference list as well. Oh, okay. So Lois, so in terms of the folio layout, that is the slide that Alistair went through earlier in this session. I'm not sure if you were there at the beginning, but Alistair actually went through that in terms of what is to be included for each scenario. So you had the topic and the resource and the image, sorry, not the image, the resource and the rationale and the reference list at the end. So that should have been hopefully clear at the start. We want a reference list for each resource separately, please. That's just a better way to structure it. Yep, Celia, we can do that. The example was on one of those slides, so I can just share the whole slide if that helps. The whole PowerPoint. So that's basically the format there, the one that Alistair's bringing up here. So scenario at the top, then the topic, then the resource, rationale and references. Is that clear enough, that slide, or do I need to do it as a separate document? Okay, cool. All right, so lots of questions. So what questions have we missed, Sheena? Oh, I see what you mean. We need to save some time for the question and answer sessions. Yep, that's fine. So we'll just quickly move back to the rubric. I think that was the main thing to clear up on the rubric anyway at the past level. If you have any more questions about the rubric, let us know. and we can answer those now. So let's go with some questions first that came out of the Canvas discussions. So Celia or Sheena, do you have any questions at all you want to address from your discussions? Sheena or Celia or Carolyn, do you want to grab the mic at all? So Jennifer, the policies, practices and principles should actually be, they're just points that you would address as part of your rationale. Yeah.
Hi guys, sorry, I'm not sure whether my mic's working.
I can hear you, Celia.
Oh, great. I don't have any specific questions that came through into the discussion board, but I want to ask some questions just to get everybody thinking, if that's okay, because there might be some things that we're not thinking of now because we've just sort of handed in assessment 1. We're starting to think about assessment 2 and Christmas, so it can all get a little bit, you know, overwhelming. So I guess I want to say, does everybody have a fairly good understanding of what we're talking about when we mean resources? I guess we could almost go back a little bit just to make sure, although now Rebecca's got a question, sorry, in terms of how to structure the rationale as it was to start with an analysis of behaviours. Oh, yes.
Hi guys, I think Celia's mic has gone. In terms of how to structure the rationale, is it wise to start with the analysis of the behaviour? I personally think that's the best place to start, with the analysis of the behaviour. To me, that makes the most logical sense, to start with the behaviour, then link that to theory, and then say, okay, that's the behaviour, the theory explains the behaviour, and here is now the resource that will address it. Look, that's not set in stone. If you think you can make your argument logical and coherent by starting with the resource, then you can. There's no rule about it. I just think the other way around might be easier to read and more logical. I'm just going to go back because I think we might have missed a couple of questions. So I think I'm just going back to okay, so I'm going back to, where are we?
Suze, I've just been copying and pasting the questions from earlier into a document so that we could go back and answer them.
Okay.
The one that was asked was no intro or conclusion, right? Question mark.
Yeah. Yep, correct. It's not an essay. You'd purely just include the actual scenario on your folio and then go explain it with your rationale. So there's no formal introduction or conclusion, as it's not an essay. It is a folio, so it's meant to actually be helpful to you in your teaching practice. So, you know, it's something you could take away and you could use it as a resource yourself. Word count is 2,000, which plus or minus your 10%. So, you know, as usual, you can go under and make it 1,800, or you can go up to 2,200 as the maximum. If you go any higher than that, the ELAs are not obliged to read it. I do recommend that you use your full 500 words per scenario, because I just think the word count is very tight and it's pretty difficult to cover off that criteria with anything under the 500. That doesn't include the actual scenario, so that will not be included. Yeah. And you will need to describe the resource as part of your 500, but be careful of not spending too much of your word count on describing the resource. Just make the description quite simple, just enough for us to understand what it does. Most of your marks are going to be gained on making your identifying behaviours, making your link with theory, and then justifying the use of the resource. So please don't waste too much of your word count on the actual describing the resource. So when you write out the scenario, it does not count as part of your word count.
Okay, there's a couple others I'm just clarifying quickly. So each resource needs to either be a principle, policy, or practice. No, the resource doesn't have to be a principle, policy, or practice. But you have to be able to use one of those as a way of rationalizing it.
Yeah, discussion point. Yeah.
Discussion point. Reference list after each folio. Does it need a separate page, or do you want it to follow straight after the action?
I think it can follow straight after.
Beautiful. Now there was another question. So principles to do with pedagogy. Okay, principles to do with pedagogy. Principles. I've put up in the chat board probably one of the easiest principles to look at is, which is the principles of teaching. So the and it's from the online professional learning resource, POLT, Principles of Learning and Teaching. So if you want to refer back to that, it's a Victorian State Government education website, but it's a really easy one to be able to use for principles. What some of the other earlier questions were regarding the presentation. We can utilize the whole scenario because it's not part of the word count if you're just typing that in. There was some...
Sorry, just add something else here that I've just thought of. Can you please try to use Word as your file type? And it's okay if you want to save it as a PDF. So Word and PDF files work best in Canvas. Canvas doesn't like text files. So if you can please not use text files, that'll be helpful.
Okay, that's good. And there's a question within that. You can use a hyperlink to the resource. Yep, that's great. But the thing is, we need you to be able to justify the resource. We're not going to be able to follow a link within the assignment and then be able to learn about the resource from a separate web page.
Yeah.
They're the earlier ones, and I think there's a number of others that have come up since then.
If you think that we missed your question, would you like to just post it again in the chat? Okay, that's a very good question, Rebecca. The assignment description asks for a preventative approach to be taken. Does this mean we should hypothesize about potential future behaviours that subjects may display and talk about the employment of our chosen resource, how it can prevent such behaviours from developing? Yes, definitely. If we simply respond to the current behaviours, is it more of a reactive rather than preventive approach? That is a really great question. And yes, I definitely think you do need to kind of hypothesize about potential behaviour. So for example, that Janine scenario, although we weren't labelling her as a bully per se, she's obviously got some, I guess, potentially bullying type qualities about her behaviour. It could, if it gets any worse, it could lead to that. So a lot of the resources on that Bullying No Way website are all about a preventative approach to bullying. So they're all about building up great relationships between students and also resources that enable students to discuss their feelings rather than acting out their feelings in a negative way. Also things like restorative practices, that's a great one to look into in terms of it being a preventative approach to children's relationships going a bit haywire or negative. So it's all about that positive approach to kind of have those really strong relationships between peers so that it doesn't lead to the more negative behaviours. Yeah, we're looking for preventative rather than reactive. So a reactive measure might be a behaviour management plan or some kind of punishment, you know, in response to a negative behaviour, rather than trying to prevent that negative behaviour from occurring in the first place. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Alyssa, that's right. Okay, any other questions? So Rebecca's saying, when choosing a resource, is it preferable to choose something quite specific like a particular activity, or something relatively contained in its focus so that we can analyse and explore its use in detail? Or is it okay to choose something with a broader scope that contains multiple ideas, activities? I personally, I'll probably like to hear from maybe one or two of the other ELAs, but I personally think that within the word count, you're going to be better off choosing a resource that enables you to address a particular behaviour in depth or in detail, rather than trying to tackle it with a whole range of resources. Like, to me, for example, something like your CURT scenario, I think things like inquiry learning, even though it is quite broad, you can still get down to in depth and detail about how giving children voice and choice is, you know, much more powerful learning opportunities for children like CURT, or maybe even looking at a gifted program, an approach to a child like CURT, sort of looking at his gifts perhaps, or his cultural background. But yeah, definitely I think just be careful of not being too broad. I think broad is okay, but I wouldn't bring in like multiple activities, because I think there's not enough word count.
So you're
Exactly.
really looking for something that's going to address that behaviour or address that, that concern. And if you have something that's too broad, it's going to be too difficult to be able to rationalise it and try and show how it's going to impact on that behaviour.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay. I know there was some more questions up there too. So if you feel that your question hasn't been brought up and it's something that you're feeling a bit anxious about, please ask it again. That'd be great. And Lois, I love that comment. Feeling confident. Thanks, guys.
If we find a resource that we think we could alter to suit the scenario, or a couple of them that we want to blend, is that okay? Yes, absolutely. I would highly recommend modifying your resource to suit the scenario. The more specific we can be in supporting a child, the better. So, I mean, you don't have to do that. If your resource already supports that behaviour really well, it's not necessary to do that. But if you find a really good resource that you might want to modify a bit, then yes, absolutely, feel free. And the other thing is, if you've chosen a resource and you want a bit of clarification on, you know, if it's suitable, don't be shy about putting it on the discussion board. It's quite fine to ask your ELA if your resource is appropriate or not. We would rather you choose an appropriate resource before you start writing about it, rather than finding out after it's been marked. So yes, the scenarios are listed on the assessment sheet. Please do refer to that, and definitely refer to the rubric closely. You need to address all 4 scenarios. Absolutely.
We addressed 3 tonight, but with the time constraints. Sorry, my son's yelling as well.
Hello.
We've got to look at the 4, and it's something that we don't want to be able to put words into your mouth as well. So we want to be able to use your research skills. You're all master's level students too, so make sure that you have questions that you can put down for your ELA as well.
Sorry, Kylie's got a good question. Do we choose 4 completely different types of resources, or can there be 2 apps and 2 of something else? Look, I think the idea of having 4 scenarios and choosing 4 resources is to try to provide a bit of a range, or, you know, a variety in how you might approach scenarios. I'm going to be honest, I would be a little bit disappointed if I saw that someone chose 2 apps and 2 of something else that's the same, because I don't know, there doesn't seem much point in doing that, I guess. Yeah, I know there are a lot of awesome apps, but we want you to try and think a little bit more widely and, you know, come across some other great ways to go as well. Yeah. All right. How are we going now, Alistair? Is everyone happy? Can we have a thumbs up if you're happy, please? Are there thumbs up? Yeah, thumbs up. Excellent. Looking good. Do we have like 19 thumbs up? That would be nice. Yay. Oh, thanks heaps, Alistair, for all your work tonight presenting this session. I'm sure it was very helpful to everybody.
Hey, Jennifer, I do like that idea too. Can I do a sort of thumbs up? So that's Jennifer. So make sure you utilize your ELA and put questions in the discussion boards too.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Shall we turn the recording off? Yay.